Hey guys, I want to take a few minutes and talk about your research proposals. I thought I'd go over it in some detail. Hopefully, that'll be helpful to you in drafting your research proposals. Now, at this point, and I know I've mentioned this before, um, you really should be looking at the overall format for your research proposals. This is located under the Major Assignments tab, and then under the Research Proposal folder. It's in attachment to the assignment. It's a Word document that outlines each section of the paper and a little bit of an explanation of each section. So if you haven't looked at that yet, look at that. I've also placed a link to that information in Module 7, so you'll have it available, um, in that module as well. So be sure to take a look at that. But in thinking about your project, now be sure to remember that the research proposal should be presented in APA format, meaning you're going to have a title page, you're going to have your abstract page, you're going to have your reference pages. There must be in-text citations. You're required to have at least 10 to 15 sources for this assignment. And when I say sources, I mean credible sources. Incredible sources, I mean, journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, government websites, professional associations, things of that nature. Stay away from things like Wikipedia, blogs, random websites on the internet with information. Make sure that the information that you're citing is from a credible and reliable source. Okay, so that's always one big issue I see in papers. So be sure to use the right type of sources. Okay, when you start drafting your research proposal, the first thing you're obviously going to have a title page. Well, before we talk about that, let's talk about your page limits. I say your paper should be around 8 to 10 pages. I don't get too caught up on number of pages. I'm looking more at content than page numbers. So if you could do a great job in 6 pages, that's great. If you need 20 pages, that's fine too. It's what the content that really matters. Okay. I'll also be sure to note that the research proposal is written in future tense. So when you're talking about your methodology, you talk about it in future tense, and the document should not be written in first person. Okay. So first of all, you're going to have your title page in APA format. Then move on to your abstract, which should just be a quick summary outlining, your research question and, what the purpose of the research and type of individuals that will be the participants of the study, 120 words or less. Okay. And then the section is introduction and statement of problem is really some of the work that you did back when you turned in your topic approval form. That statement of the problem and then your research question. That's kind of what's in the study. It outlines the area of study, the topic, the problem that you're interested in, the purpose of the study, why it's significant, that kind of information. And you move on to define any terms. If there's any special terms you're using, you want to define within the independent and dependent variables, you can do so at that point. Okay. Then we move into the literature review. And the literature review is one of the most important components of the assignment. You should cite at least, like I said, 10 to 15 articles. And literature review really takes the reader on a journey in understanding how you got to your research question. So you should definitely discuss the dependent and independent variables in detail, and then anywhere that the two come together in the research. So be sure to give a good, clear overview of your topic. The more information, the better. Assume the reader knows nothing about your topic. You're starting from scratch, okay? Because when you're looking at for research for your literature review, you'll notice that a lot of those articles you're reading, when they're literature reviews, they go from a very basic time point in time. They explain everything in great detail. So you need to also provide that information in your literature review. Then we move on to the methodology section, which has a couple of two subsections. One of which is your research design. You said this is where you say you input your research question. You talk about your dependent independent variables. You talk about your research design. That all that we've been working through in the past couple discussions. That information should be housed right here. You should talk about who your participants are. What are where are they coming from? What do they look like demographically? That kind of information, and how you're going to obtain your sample. And then, you explain all that in great detail. Now, one thing I will mention is that in any research study, there's the expectation that you will gain informed consent. We learned that with the research ethics and all that information we were going through around the Tuskegee study. So informed consent is very important. So also include your informed consent form in your appendices of your research your research proposal. So that's an important component that you need to also provide. Okay, and then in the instrumentation section, this is where you'll talk about how you're going to measure your dependent variables. And we've talked about that in the discussion, the past couple discussions, in 4 and 5. How you're going to really measure and move forward with helping the reader to understand if your research question was effective or not. For example, if I research topic I'm looking at depression, and I'm looking at the effects of classical music on depressive symptoms. Okay, does classical music increase depressive symptoms? Okay, so I need some way to measure the depressive symptoms, because that is the dependent variable that I'm looking at. The independent variable would be the classical music. Okay, so if I use something like that depression inventory, and that's a standard measure that's accepted in the field, that is commonly used to measure depression severity. So I would use that perhaps at the beginning of my study, and then every 2 weeks for a period of 3 months. So I would explain what the instrument is I'm using. That's where you explain that in the instrumentation section. And there's some mention here about reliability and validity of the instrument. Well, if you're using a standardized measure, of course that's going to be more reliable and more valid, because it's a proven measure. Okay, but if you design it, you need to discuss, the issues with reliability and validity. You also need to put a copy of your instrumentation that you're using, whether it be a standard measure, whether it be a something you design, you need a copy of it in your appendices as well. Okay. All right, when we move on to data collection and data analysis, that's what we were just discussing in Module 6. That's really, that's kind of confusing, I think, to some folks, but it's really two very different things. The data collection is really, who's going to collect the data, how is it going to be collected, where is it going to be stored, how are you going to, put it into a table or a spreadsheet, who's managing it, who's inputting that data, how will you make sure the data is correct, if the data has personal information on it, or personally identifiable information, you need to make sure that data remains confidential. How are you going to ensure that? Are you going to number it to take names off of it? That kind of thing. So we need to talk about there. Now, data analysis is really what are you going to do once you have the data? So you've collected all this data, you have it all in a spreadsheet. What do you do now? Right? So this is where we look at, what type of analysis you're using. Are you using descriptive statistics or inferential statistics? As you've outlined in some of your reading, that includes like descriptive statistics include like mean, median, and mode, range, and standard deviation. Or inferential statistics, things like a t-test. What are you really looking at when you're analyzing your data? Okay. You don't have to go into a great detail, and certainly we don't have any data that we've collected, but this is just your plan for what you will do with your data once it is collected. Okay. Now, something we hadn't really hit on, but this is going to be something you include in your study, is limitations to your study. These are like barriers to your study. What do you think will face, barriers you'll face or things that could affect your study? Like for example, if you're doing a really small sample, like say your sample's 20 people or 50 people, of a very large population, that's a very small sample. So that could affect, that could be a limitation to the your study. It may not be generalizable because it's such a small sample. Okay. Also, you're going to include a timeline, and this doesn't have to be like a timeline, as far as, like a visual line with marks on it. It can just be a little bit of discussion, like a paragraph about how long it's going to take for you to get each step done. I mean, how long will it take for you to get consent? How long will it take for you to get a baseline, state, like in my example about the classical music and depression, how long will it take me to get the participants? Then on like maybe month 1, I'll get informed consent. Month 2, I'll get that baseline depression inventory. And then every 2 weeks, I'm going to be giving that depression inventory to my participants. And then at 6 months, the data will be concluded. Then at that point, how long will it take you to get the data together and then to analyze the data? So just a time frame about how long it's going to take you in total. Okay. And then your reference section, that's your reference page in APA format. Everything that's cited in the paper. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to cite every fact that you put in the paper. In the literature review, if you have a statement of fact in there, it should have a citation. There should not be anything in your paper that's not cited. That is not your part of your methodology or something of that nature. This more pertains to your literature review, okay? And then, of course, you have your appendices, which would be your consent form or your instrument that you're using, okay? So that kind of takes you through the overall format for this research proposal. Now, I hope that you realize at this point that we have been working on sections of this proposal each week. So the feedback, the feedback that you've been getting for each discussion really should help you build those sections of the paper, especially in the past few weeks. That has really been, we've been really hitting hard on methodology and data collection, data analysis. So that information should be super helpful for you guys in drafting your research proposals. Once your research proposals are turned in, there's also an expectation of the research presentation. That's in the discussion format. So that will also be an assignment coming up. But in Module 7, I really wanted to give you guys lots of time to, get your research proposal finished and your presentation put together, and have plenty of time. So this Module 7 will carry us through the remainder of the semester. So if you have questions as you're going through your research proposal, or if you want me to take a look at it, feel free to email me, and I will definitely get back to you as quick as I can, and we can work through it. So I hope this is helpful in drafting your research proposal. Have a great day.